Kia ora, kia ora. Mauri ora ki te whare. Me wehi kia i o matua kore, te tīmatanga o te whakaaro nui. E tū atu nei au, he uri no papatu anuku, e takoto nei. Tēnā koe te whaia tūpuna. Me whakahonore ki te kingi Māori, kingi Tuheitia, e noho mai rā i runga te ahurewa tapu o tōna whaia o ona tūpuna, tainoa ki te kahui ariki nui tonu pai marire. Kia ora. Ki ngā hunga mate, huhua o te tau, o te marama, o te wiki, o e nai nei. Haere atu rā koutou ki te kāpunipuni o te atu ai. Ka hoki mai ki a tātou, ki te haukainga, tēnā koutou. Ki a tātou nā kanohi ora, e oki nei rungi tēnei kaupapa whakahirahira, te whara o ngā roro. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko paringaringa te moana, ko te reo mihi te marae, ko te aupauri, ko Ngāti Kuri, ko te rarawa ko ngā puinu tonu o kuiwi ko Hinemoa Elder tōku ingoa. Kia ora everybody, thank you so much for inviting me today. What a beautiful whare, what a beautiful place. I've actually never been to Port Waikato before, I'm sad to say, so thank you for this opportunity. So I wear a number of hats and they stack up a bit like cat on the hat. Eh? It's not like in the Māori world we swap hats, we just add hats on. So yes, I'm from the far north, from Te Kotiu, that's the wind of the far north. And my mother was born in Herekino, so I'm part of the Yates whānau, I'm part of the Murray whānau from up there. And I am the only Māori child and adolescent psychiatrist that we have at the moment. I'm trying my best to recruit some more, but it's a very long training, sadly, and so it's not very attractive to many of our mokpuna. And I became really interested in traumatic brain injury after I spent a year at the Starship Hospital working for what's called the Consult Liaison Service there, Consult Liaison Psychiatry. That's when psychiatrists work inside the hospital looking after people with mental health needs. So for example, I saw tamariki mokopuna with brain injury, I saw children who were having transplanted organs, children having cardiac surgery, because all of these things impact on tamariki mokopuna mental health. And so I'm going to share with you some of the mahi that I've done subsequently. So I've been a consultant for ACC purely for the needs of our tamariki mokopuna with traumatic brain injury and their whānau since about 2007. And I found an absolute drive to bring the Māori world into that sphere because it was so white, it was so Pākehā, and it didn't feel safe, from what I could tell, for whānau to be Māori when they were on their healing journey around brain injury. So I'm going to share with you some of the things I've learned. And I want to start by showing you this picture of my Uncle Glass Murray, beside our waka, famous waka up in Waitangi. And I want to show you this picture for a couple of reasons. Uncle Glass was very supportive of me doing this research into te whara o ngā roro, into brain injury. And I knew that I had to go home and get permission from my whānau to explore this area because he tapu tērā neha, he tapu te upoko. And it's interesting because I love these photos of Uncle Glass by the waka there, Ngā Toki Mata Whāurua. He was one of the guys on the waka that was built in 1940 for the 100-year commemoration of the treaty. And so it's interesting that those photos have been hanging in my office with the waka, signalling to me. It took me a while to realise what those signals meant, but all will become clear shortly. So that's my Uncle Glass and his waka. So as you may know, being an Indigenous person puts you at much higher risk of a brain injury, and there's many reasons for that. And also, many of you will know that we think differently about the head. I've already given you one example. We say the head is sacred, he tapu, te upoko. We unfortunately have very high rates of traumatic brain injury. So the latest poll, if you like, a very good study that was published in 2012 by Feigin, Feigin, in the Lancet, which was a study where they comprehensively brought together data from a range of sources, and they found that our Māori rates of TBI were much, much higher than Pākehā, and in particular for our young people. So all of that information, together with my experience as a doctor working alongside whānau, really drove my energy and my passion to find out more about how we could bring our cultural values into this space. So one of the first things that I wanted to do was I wanted to create a way for whānau to identify what they needed. Because it's such a confusing time, it's such a difficult time, everything is up in the air. Often we're just so grateful that whānau have survived their brain injury, when maybe we were wondering whether they may not. People feel a range of emotions, guilty, grief-stricken, angry. It's a tumultuous time, and so often, in my experience, it was really hard for whānau to begin to clarify what is it that we actually need right now, and especially from a cultural perspective. So in developing this tool, which I'm going to show to you in a moment, I arranged a series of wānanga. So we all know what wānanga are. I've just put that up just in case. There were people fresh to New Zealand from other places who don't know what wānanga. We're in a wānanga right now, yeah. And so I had relationships and developed and fostered relationships with 9 different marae around Aotearoa. And I was directed to some of these marae by the elders, by the kaumātua, part of my research. And so from that process of marae wānanga, I came up with a theory, a Māori theory of traumatic brain injury. And what that theory says is that when you injure the organ of the brain, you also injure the person's wairua. Which might sound really obvious, but I didn't know that when I started. But that certainly emerged in the process of this research. So here, the people that were involved in this study, and you can read these papers online, I can email them actually to Elise if you want to have them available. The people in my study said that wairua is more than spirituality. So often we'll see the term wairua translated as spirituality. That what they said was that wairua is a unique connection between Māori people and all aspects of the universe. So you can imagine the idea of injuring that connection is a profound cultural injury. And so the idea and the theory is that when you have that profound cultural injury, you have some cultural things that need to be done to address that and heal that cultural injury. So from that, I also collected 46 key statements from the people who had participated in the marae wānanga. And I developed a scale using those. And these kōrero, these comments, if you will, fell into 4 broad groups, and they formed the subgroups of the scale, which I'm going to show you in a moment. I had another refining series of wānanga because I wanted to check that these statements might be a bit clunky, a bit clumsy, they might not read particularly well. So we had some wānanga up in Te Tai Tokerau, and the last one was with some whānau from Whatever It Takes in Auckland. So they were the sort of finishing school of the tool, if you like, because they were people who'd actually experienced traumatic brain injury. And then after we got it to that point, 319 people filled this thing in, and that allowed me to validate it. So I'll show you some examples now. Oh, first of all, I'll tell you a bit about the people who filled it in. So this is I'm not sure if everyone can see this. There's a lot going on here, but 319 people altogether. The majority, nearly 63%, were wahine. They ranged in age from 11 to 76. They were either people who'd actually had a brain injury, their whānau members, people who knew them through friendship or through work, or they were interested community members. And they came from all around the motu, and I classified the brain injury as confirmed, possible and unknown. And they completed the tool in a range of different settings, as you can see, at some kurereo, at some other functions around the North Island. And then I did a flash statistical analysis of this data that they had completed, and the paper is just at the moment being reviewed by a journal called Assessment. So I hope that within the next few weeks I'll hear back maybe some reviewer comments, and then that will be published. And then we'll be able to use it in the field as a new evidence-based Māori tool. So the 4 subscales that I mentioned earlier were wāhi, place, wā, time, tangata, people, and wairua practices that strengthen wairua. And in the course of this analysis, 10 of the 46 items didn't fit the model, so they went out. So we're left with 36 items. So let's have a look at those, which don't quite fit on the slide. Never mind. Okay. First of all, maybe I'll just tell you a little bit about the name of the tool. So the tool is called Tiaka Kuaka. So any of you from the far north will know that the kuaka is one of our kaitiaki special bird, the godwit. So what does the godwit do? It travels long distances. It migrates, yes, from the far north, Kaipara, to Siberia and back. And I found this really inspiring, this metaphor of the kuaka, because it reminded me of the journey of whānau who are experiencing TBI. Whānau need to get organised, need to organise their thinking. And so this is what this tool does. Just like the kuaka get organised for these long migratory journeys, this tool helps whānau to get their thoughts organised to journey through their own healing processes. Okay, so and mana, ai, kia ora, koe apu. So what you do when you see this tool is you've got 4 options. You can strongly agree with a statement, you can agree, you can disagree, and you can strongly disagree. So that means that both for whānau filling it in for themselves and for health workers who might be working alongside them, you can get an immediate profile of what are the most needed, most agreed with things and the least agreed with. So you can immediately prioritise the kinds of activities that the whānau are requesting, are identifying that they need. So I'm sorry it doesn't come up as perfectly as I would wish. I think it's to do with the well, I won't worry about that now, but I'll read out a couple to you. And as you can see, it's in Te Reo Pākehā and in Te Reo Māori. So I think it's the first bilingual instrument. So the first, one of the first options or statements is, starting the process of wairua healing is the first thing that needs to happen for our whānau. So there could be a whānau who say, yes, absolutely, that is a top priority, I strongly agree with that. There might be other whānau who say, actually, no, not so much, I just want to get that MRI scan happening, so let's focus on that. So it doesn't judge, the tool is merely there to help bring those needs clearly to the fore. Another one, the journey of wairua healing for whānau is enhanced with time. So for some whānau, having time taken for wairua practices is a really important thing in that moment, and others not so much. Health workers could take more time to help the whānau understand what's going on. So this is quite a practical one, and really good for us as health workers to get feedback. Actually, as a whānau, yeah, we really endorse this, and so that means, okay, I need to take more time with this whānau to make sure that they understand what's happening. Time needs to be taken to consider other trauma within whakapapa. So this was a really interesting theme that came from the previous research from the marae wānanga, where people talked about the fact that once a mokopuna tamariki had a brain injury, that people's minds went back to other things that had happened in the past that may have influenced, that may in their mind have even caused this injury to occur. And so the sense was, without casting the mind back and bringing those other experiences forward to be healed, that brain injury wouldn't be completely healed either. So it's seeing the brain injury with the context going back through whakapapa. And as you can see, some whānau might say, no, that's not something that's really big on my radar right now. And other whānau might say, oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Okay, let's have a look at some others. The use of pepeha within treatment would support the healing. So everyone here knows what pepeha is, right? That's, okay, thank you. That's the way we introduce ourselves. That's how we locate ourselves in time and space. So I did a really brief pepeha mentioning my moana, which is parengarenga. And so we can say, you know, your mountain, your river, your lake, your marae, and your name comes at the end. So in the Māori world, the pepeha is very powerful. One of the other things I do is I write court reports. So I write court reports for the Kōti Rangatahi, and as you may know, regardless of what's going on in terms of reparations, that Māori youth offenders who come to marae courts, just like on this marae, the main thing that the judge wants them to learn is to be able to stand up and say their pepeha. So, again, maybe whānau would find that something useful or not such a big priority at that time. Gathering, preparing and eating food from home is an important part of healing. So one of the things that can happen when people are away from home, maybe in hospital or in clinics or in step-down units, subacute units, is that they are craving the kai from home. And for some whānau, this is a really big deal. And so it's represented there as an option. Being on the marae is a good place to start to feel strong again. So for some people, the marae is an absolute energy trap of healing energy. So all of these tuku panels and all these designs are actually brain injury rehabilitation resources. They could be used as such. Okay, let's have a look at a few others. This is from the section about tangata. Within the whānau is the rongoā. Within the whānau is the medicine. So sometimes our whānau are really struggling and they might look like they're in chaos. And some services perhaps focus on that chaos and that difficulty. And whānau can be pathologised by that. You know, whānau maybe don't turn up to appointments. Sometimes in mental health services, unfortunately we have these sort of rules that say, well, you know, 3 strikes and you're out. You don't turn up to your appointments, your file is closed. So for me, that approach is not acceptable. people need the support, and if they're not coming at the time when it's convenient for the clinicians, then the clinicians need to do something different. So anyway, that's my whakaaro. These are the whakaaro from the marae. Some of the other options, being whānau means you don't have to know everything yourself. That's a really interesting concept, and I think it speaks to the collectivism and the shared skills that we have. And we may not think that as Māori, just going about our daily business, but when something like a TBI happens in a whānau, my experience tells me and my research tells me that things change, and many Māori want these cultural issues to be addressed. And finally, let's have a look at a couple from the last part of the scale. Maybe just the final one. It doesn't matter if you can't understand te reo, the effect remains strong. So I was actually surprised that some of these statements about te reo Māori made it through to the final validated version that we have sent for publication. I wasn't sure whether, because we hear the paradigm that, well, te reo Māori is a language that's really in trouble. Maybe only about 120,000 people can have a conversation in te reo Māori, and yet through the wānanga, it was a major thing that the potential of te reo, the vibration of te reo, was a very healing aspect of the language, and even if you couldn't understand it, it was still doing its magic. So that remains in the final tool. So that's the Waka Kuaka. And so at the moment I'm recruiting whānau into the next phase where we're actually going to test that out alongside its teina, which is another tool that I developed during my PhD. And I will just name drop a bit because one of my PhD supervisors was Professor Sir Mason Jury, and another one was Professor Chris Cunningham, and also Professor Richard Fall. So three esteemed Māori leaders in research who were incredible mentors. So this is the companion tool that works with te Waka Kuaka, and it's called te Waka Oranga. And as you can see, you can imagine if you're one of those kuaka flying overhead, looking down, and you see a waka. On one side sits the whānau, and on the other side sits the health workers, people like me. And there's a number of practices that go with this way of working, this approach. I don't want to call it an intervention because an intervention sounds really clinical, and what I've learned is that those sorts of words really put our whānau off. So one of the key aspects of using the Waka Oranga is the matapono, the principles of practice. So the first principle is that wairua is fundamental and it's attended to as a priority. The second is that whānau are the functional unit of healing. So this is quite different from the focus that we see in most of the Western international literature and practice, which is around the individual health and the independence of the person being the goal. In actual fact, I think there can be a tension there because many whānau that I work with, they're not wanting independence, they're wanting interdependence, they're wanting the strengthening of those relationships. So I just think we have to be very mindful of exploring interdependence as well. I'm not saying that in Māori culture we don't value independence, I think we do, but not as much as interdependence. Whānau experience the clinical world as an alien culture, and I think this is something that clinicians, as a clinician, the default position is we tend to minimise the reality of that. You know, for me, I've worked with people with brain injury for a long time. It's easy to maybe potentially get complacent about how much of a shock it is for a whānau to be facing that injury, where they have no experience of that whole world, of navigating that world. Mātauranga Māori has a wealth of resources specific to mokopuna traumatic brain injury. So, yeah, I use the word mokopuna quite a bit. We're all mokopuna, actually, no matter how young or senior. And what this is saying is, yes, within our knowledge systems, there are specific pieces of knowledge and ways of using knowledge that can be healing for a traumatic brain injury. Māori identity is about connection. Places have a healing role because they define identity, so that relates to what I was saying about pepeha also. And other trauma is remembered when traumatic brain injury discussion is invited. So, thinking about those principles and te waka oranga, these are the two key practices that are facilitated using this approach. The first is hoitahi. So if you're on a waka and people are not all paddling in the same direction, you could end up going round in circles. So it's really a key aspect is to learn about each other and learn about that paddling together as one and establishing the ground rules, who's on board for this particular journey. So this tool is very flexible. It could be used in an acute situation in the hospital where you need to plan for the next half a day or for the next procedure. Equally, it could be used when you're in the community and you're planning months in advance. Each hoi, each paddle, has two faces. One represents skills and the other represents emotions. So all the people on board, whether you're a health worker or you're a whānau member, will be invited to think about and talk about the skills that they bring and the emotions that they bring. So this is taking everyone a little bit out of their comfort zone. Whānau are not usually expecting to be asked about the skills that they bring to the recovery journey. But this paradigm is saying whānau knowledge is equal to clinical knowledge. Especially if you're talking about having a cultural injury, you're going to need that cultural intel from whānau. Equally, clinicians are not used to being asked about how they feel. What are their emotions, right? Nevertheless, this is an important part of learning how to hoitahi. And there are some emotions that clinical people can feel relatively comfortable about talking about. Concern, hope, those sorts of fairly benign terms are the entry point for clinical teams to start being involved in that process. And then the second big part of the work is te haerenga o te waka, the journeying, so launching, sailing and arriving. One of the key dynamics of this approach comes from our waka tradition. So our ancestors were extraordinary travellers, and the way that they thought about going different places across Te Moana Nui a Kiwa was also different. They didn't think about, well, I'm going to go there. They thought, I'm going to bring that place towards me. Totally different, yeah. The way I think of it is, I don't know if when you were little, playing by the moana or by the awa or by a puddle or in the bath, and you'd have a toy, a stick or a leaf, and if it started to drift away from you, you can pull on the water and you can bring that object towards you. So that's kind of how I conceptualise that kind of energy, which is quite different from the energy that can emerge from goal setting, which is part of the absolute standard evidence-based approach. Goal setting, striving for goals, setting up goals, and then not achieving goals and getting very frustrated because you have identified something very concrete. So those are the two key practices. And I've just talked to you about the hoi, so we've done that bit. And then just wanted to touch on a couple more things about these waka journeys. So many of you will be familiar with kupe. Yeah, heard of kupe before? Right, yeah. Alright. And kupe knew that there was land down here. How did he know that? When he set off, he got his mother and whānau and pigs and things on the waka and said, right, we're off, we're going south. How did he know there was land here? Aye. Do you know the bird that he followed? Kuaka. Could have been one. I think they go the other way, but maybe Kuaka.
Migration.
Aye.
Down here's the time to south.
Koia. And one of the birds he watched was the pipi whānau. You know the pipi whānau? Aye. And he could see that those birds flew south and then they came back in like September, October was when they left. And they didn't have webbed feet, so there had to be land. And the other thing that he observed was whales. Whales migrating, and apparently they swim quite slowly, about 5 knots, whereas the waka at that time were the fastest vehicles on the planet, 15 knots an hour. So the whales are going about 5 knots an hour. They're kind of, cruising on down with their whānau. And so the kupe's waka was able to follow them down to the southern oceans. And then, of course, clouds. He ao te aroa. Right? They saw this huge cloud, the biggest cloud they'd ever seen, because that was the biggest landmass that they'd ever seen underneath it. So I think these ways of thinking about journeys are very much part of the model, the approach that I've developed to work with our whānau. And of course, one key thing is that these waka are our own. So when you're working with a whānau with Te Waka Oranga, you can find out, well, what are your waka? Are you takitimu? Are you kurahaupo? Who's your waka? What's your waka? And then you can use the stories of those waka to help the whānau on their recovery journey. So you can really personalise the tool. So just coming to the end of my presentation, whānau, we need Māori tools. We need Māori approaches in this space of TBI. Why? Well, there's a lot of people who are facing these issues, a lot of whānau, and we know it's the silent epidemic because a lot of the time people think, oh, you look fine. Oh, what? You had a brain injury, you hit your head, oh, you're all right. You can't see anything on the outside. And I suppose as I've put forward this theory that there's a cultural injury. So if there's a cultural injury, we better have some cultural grunt to deal with that, to heal that injury. It's the first time, as far as I know, that we have a bilingual assessment tool in TBI, needs assessment. And what I've also tried to do is create a blueprint for other researchers, because one of the big problems that we have in Māori health is we really don't have robust ways to measure, to identify what works, what's needed. This particular tool, Te Waka Oranga, Te Waka Kuaka, I think, can operate both as a needs assessment tool and as an outcome measure, because you can use it to track and monitor what's working well, how do the needs fluctuate over time. So that's why I've tried to publish all the little sections along the way so that people can use that as a map if they're working in a different area, let's say diabetes or stroke. I think there's probably wider application. You may have noticed that the words traumatic brain injury don't come up in the Waka Kuaka tool. And when I've gone around the motu talking about the different stages of development, I've had many health workers from different fields asking me if they could use it. So I've had whānau order workers asking me if they could use it, chronic care nurses, social workers. So I think there's potential there in mental health and addictions and for older people's health. So anything that affects the brain, affects the head, potentially this approach might also be helpful. So I also want to thank the Health Research Council of New Zealand who funding my postdoctoral fellowship. I've got one more year. So maybe I'll come back next year and let you know what happened with the real life trialling of these measures. And of course, as you know, e harataku toa I te toa takitahi, engari he toa takitini care. This sort of work, I've got a whole lot of people standing here next to me. You can't see them, but they're there. This sort of work doesn't happen alone. You need kaumātua support, kaumātua kuia support. You need support from home, whānau, and from around the motu. So thank you very much for your attention. Kia ora tātou.